So how does VTEC actually work? Well, at lower RPM, this outer profile will be responsible for opening and closing the valves. And it does that by pushing these outer rocker arms down. Now, VTEC can optimize airflow during those strokes to maximize and optimize the airflow that you get going through the engine. I am currently surrounded by VTEC. There's VTEC in this S2000, in this Honda Accord, and in this Honda Civic Type R engine in front of me. Now, before we look inside of the Type R engine, let's look at a simplified example. So here we have a cylinder head and we have valves to allow air to come in and out of the cylinder. So here we have the intake valve, which allows for air to go in, and then here we have the exhaust valve, which allows for air to go out. Now, how much these valves actually open is dependent on the camshaft. So the camshaft is going to be responsible for opening and closing those valves. So you can see these cam lobes on the camshaft right here. So this is rotating, and as it rotates, it will force that valve open. Now, the greater the height on this lobe right here that forces that valve open, the more it's going to lift. And so the more that valve lifts open, you can see the more airflow it will allow to come in or out of the engine. Now, if you can put more air into an engine, you can put more fuel into that engine, and then you can make more power. So now let's take a look at how the valves work on the Type R engine. So here we can see two different camshafts, this rod running along right here and right here. And a traditional camshaft will look like this one right here, where you have just a single cam profile that is used to open and close the valves, versus a VTEC camshaft, which you have right here, which has multiple profiles of different heights and different lengths that will open and close those valves. So here we can see the VTEC camshaft, and here are the two valves that this camshaft is responsible for opening and closing. And as you can see, it has two different cam profiles to choose between. So it can use this inner cam profile, which has a higher lift on it, or it can use this lower cam profile here on the outside. It'll use both of these simultaneously to open these two valves. So it can switch between these two profiles. So why might you want this lower profile? Well, you'll use the lower profiles at lower RPM. So at lower RPM, you don't need as much air, and so because of that, you use a lower profile, and that means that the air is coming in faster. By restricting the airflow, the air is forced to speed up. And by speeding up that air, it mixes with the fuel better, and because it's mixed with the fuel better, you get more efficient combustion. Now at high RPM, you want to make as much power as possible, so you want as much air coming in the engine as possible. So you use the higher lift cam profile, and that allows that valve to open up more, and you can force more air into the engine, and thus use more fuel and make more power. So how does VTEC actually work? Well, at lower RPM, this outer profile, as mentioned, will be responsible for opening and closing the valves. And it does that by pushing these outer rocker arms down. This center rocker arm is disconnected from these two outer rockers, and so this center cam profile is moving this center rocker up and down, but because it's not attached to the outer rockers, which are attached to the valves, it's not actually influencing the lift of the valves, so they're lifted with the lower cam profile. Now, once the engine starts spinning up faster, you're going to want to start to use this higher lift cam profile. And so what happens is oil pressure at those higher engine RPMs will force a piston to lock these rocker arms together. And so where previously this cam profile was just moving this rocker arm up and down and it wasn't doing anything, now it is locked to these rocker arms, which are of course attached to the valves. So now this center cam profile is responsible for opening and closing the valves, and because it has a higher lift, the valves will then have a higher lift. And you can continue to use oil pressure to change if that piston has locked or unlocked these rocker arms to choose which cam profile you want to use. Now, if you've been paying close attention, you'll have noticed that VTEC only exists on this engine on the exhaust side, so only for operating the exhaust valves, versus the intake valves up top, which just have a single cam profile, different from many of Honda's previous performance engines, which have VTEC on both the intake and the exhaust. So why in this case is there VTEC only on the exhaust side? Well, the reason is that this engine is turbocharged, as you can see right here. So the turbocharger makes it really easy to force air into the engine. It's easy to get that air in without using that extra lift profile. But then once you've had combustion occur, and those gases have expanded, you have a really high pressure in that cylinder. And so by using the higher lift profile, it's easier to force those exhaust gases out. And the other thing you have to work against, not only do you have that higher pressure after combustion, you also have to force that air through a turbocharger. So by using the higher lift profile, it's easier for that airflow to move out, move through the turbocharger and out the exhaust.